Two of my most talented friends, the artist Don Colley and the photographer Stuart Rome, independently urged me to go to the Crane Arts Building and to film what Stuart called Philadelphia's must-see summer art show.
Hello, my name is Ivey. My friends call me Ivey. I'd just like to welcome you to the show called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. It's a collection of some of the work I've done over the years about nuclear arms and nuclear proliferation. I was born in February of 1949, and August of 1949, the Soviets exploded their first nuclear weapon. Most historians consider that the beginning of the Cold War. I was a senior in high school. I went out for the debate team, and the subject matter for that year was nuclear proliferation. So I followed it for the rest of my life. People who are my age, we've spent our whole lives living under the fear of the bomb. The show is not just about nuclear weapons, but it's about the atomic age, the way it's affected our society, the cost that we paid, the social cost, as well as the economic cost, living in an age of nuclear fear. I first became interested in artwork when I was a very young boy. My mother wasn't an artist, but she was very aesthetic, and she wanted to encourage her children. And so at a very young age, my twin sister sat around the kitchen table and painted paint by numbers and did craft projects. When I was in school, I was in an accelerated track, and it was very structured. One of the few classes where I got to do what I wanted to do was art. Naturally, I fell in love with that. Then I went to the University of Texas at Austin for both undergraduate and graduate school. And my artwork is really influenced a lot by American folk art, especially Tex-Mexican folk art, because I grew up in South Texas. One of the characteristics of that art is artists tend to take the materials at hand and make art with it, and it's often very diverse. I love craft. I try and bring a lot of craftsmanship to the pieces. Because I was broadly skilled in metalworking and woodworking, I combined a lot of different materials in a piece. A friend gave me a set of tools, and I just taught myself how to carve leather. I had been doing very abstract pieces before. The reason I moved on to this kind of subject matter, I felt like I had a story to tell. Folk art tends to be very narrative. It was really kind of a rejection of the cold abstraction of late modernism and looking for a new avenue of making art that would be more descriptive and one in which I could use my political sensibilities integrated into my artwork. In addition to folk art, there are other contemporary artists I've been interested in. I more or less taught myself how to paint, but certainly is admiring other artists, especially the Chicago School, the Harry Hugh School, and all of those guys. H.C. Westerman was a wonderful craftsman, and he had a very delightful sense of humor. Even when I'm dealing with very serious subject matter, I like to do it playfully. I want the objects to be visually fun, sometimes even funny. I have one golden rule about making sculpture, which is that the process has to be fun for me. And I feel like if I work that way, I'll make images that are fun for people to look at. Some of the pieces in the show are a little bit more abstract still, so you can see the blending of both narration and abstract in the work. Shadow is about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This next month we're coming up on the 70th anniversary of those bombings. In the blast area, everything was pretty much obliterated and human beings were vaporized. And the only human remains left were shadows of the human beings that had been burnt into the sidewalk and walls of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is a figure that is in the process of becoming a shadow. The front side of the piece is an abstracted relief. The human flesh is starting to become an abstraction. And on the backside are just colored rays of radiation. I'm trying not to use fear as a way of helping people to understand what happened. Fear tends to paralyze people and makes them feel helpless. If you see the photographs themselves of women with their kimono patterns actually burnt into their skin, they're very frightening images, but for the most part I've avoided using that type of imagery. Even though the images are about a very dark subject matter, I try and keep them fun to look at. In this little grouping, including shadow, I have also placed a Fat Man. Fat Man was an implosion bomb which we dropped on Nagasaki. It had a huge bulbous kind of shape. I prettified it a little bit because it's kind of an antique now. The other piece here is called Tricycle. It was about Hiroshima. One of the objects they found left over from the blast was a small tricycle that was all burnt and charred. The unfortunate child that had been riding it had been obliterated. This is a very diminutive small piece with bright, candy, childlike colors. I wanted it to be a child's eye view of that apocalyptic moment when he and his family and his city were destroyed. They also found in Hiroshima a wristwatch which had stopped at the exact time that the bomb had gone off, 8:16 in the morning. Before we started bombarding people from above in World War I, there was no concept of ground zero, but now it's a word that's familiar around the world. I'm depicting that ground zero moment when a family is in the wrong place at the wrong time and are turned into skeletons. A mom and her holding her small baby. The dad facing away. A child falling off of his bicycle as he reaches for his dog. And I just wanted to show the tenderness of humanity at the moment that we snuff it out. This is a piece called Bloodbath. It was built during the Iraq War. We were bombing heavily. There were lots of civilian casualties. I wanted to capture the moment when individuals are struck by one of these devastating weapons and turned into fire and blood. That's why the red color and the star shape, it's meant to represent a very particular but dreadful human moment. The shirt is kind of another dreadful human moment. Atomic bombs kill in different ways. The blast itself. Then there's a concussion wave and a thermal wave that goes out from that, and then finally a radiation wave. But as the thermal wave goes out, it starts fires everywhere. The greatest casualties from the bombs are from fire. Those who are close enough, the human body will go up just like a torch. These two are both missile pieces. The first one, XY, has two readings. I was particularly concerned about anti-missile defense and the role it plays in nuclear arms. I also included a cowboy and an Indian to exemplify the conflict between cultures that leads to us using these kinds of weapons. During the MAD era, we built up enormous numbers of nuclear warheads. Height of the Cold War, there were about 140,000 in the world, creating a tremendous overkill. So this is just a representation of that. I'm sort of making a bar graph, piling up missiles. But to give you an idea of how mad really was, this piece has about 100 warheads on it. It's about 10 foot tall. If I had accurately bar graphed, I would have had to have created 14,000 missiles of the same size and shape to fill the gallery. This is a piece called Strike First. During the Cold War, one of the great fears that has always driven the accumulation of nuclear weapons has been the fear that our adversaries would acquire an advantage in nuclear arms and to do a decapitating strike. So the struggle between the Soviets and the United States has always been one of trying to prevent the other side from having that capacity. This is a missile exploding. At the very top of it is a transparent object that's meant to be a stealth bomber. This is a piece called Empire, probably the smallest sculpture in the show. I built it this year. I wanted to do a piece that both looked like a bomb and a mushroom cloud at the same time. It's illuminated by the inscription on the back, full spectrum dominance. We as a nation are dedicated to the proposition that we will meet any threat anywhere in the world and use any level of violence to prevail. This is a piece called Newborn. It's carved marble and carved leather. It was finished in 2013. The piece really is about the end of the world. Carved marble, egg-like bomb, as if a newborn has arrived. At a certain point, we may well build a bomb that ends us all. It's a portrait of the last nuclear bomb. And the base is also part of that because I've carved a leather representation of the ancient Mexican god Quetzalcoatl. In ancient Mexico, they believed Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent, had created humanity and that all of us were the fifth reincarnation of humanity. It's us, the human creation, being overlaid by the apocalypse. I was curious exactly what people saw in Ronald Reagan. I think the appeal to that American cowboy archetype that runs through American culture, and especially in the Texas culture that I grew up in. I decided to do this over life-size cowboy, tell the story of that particular era when the United States was expanding its empire, flexing its muscle on the world stage, and engaging in cowboy diplomacy. The chaps themselves were intended to portray the way that we've used nuclear arms as an umbrella under which we could use our military force and expand our empire. In a comic way, I've used that cowboy and Indian mentality that as a young child, of course, I experienced with mass media. But I've given it a sardonic bite to try and challenge this particular myth. When I built it, it was finished in 1988 when he left office. It was meant to be a commentary on that particular age. What I didn't foresee is that the next 30 years we would continue with that kind of cowboy diplomacy. And I didn't expect this piece to tell the future. Usually sculpture is kind of a backward-looking craft. It tells you what you have done, not what you're going to do. It's really an old Texas tall tale that seems to have come to life. I built this to commemorate the death from above, and it was kind of a companion piece for Ground Zero. The piece has skulls piled up on one side to represent all of the loved ones that we lost in that horrible moment. And on the other side, it's an American flag that represents the way the country itself was the target, not just the individuals. I purposely kept the colors just black and gold. Since it's a requiem piece, I wanted it to keep a kind of somber tone to it. This is a piece called Baghdad, built while we were engaged in the conflict over there. The ancient symbol for Mesopotamia, the precursor to Iraq, was a lion. I'm showing the shock and awe moment when we attacked Baghdad. On one side, I have the famous moment where Saddam Hussein's sculpture is pulled down. Then I have a couple of visions of innocent individuals that were caught up in the bombing campaigns. At the time this was going on, I had family members in Iraq. A niece who served 3 years as a private contractor, a water purification expert, and she was in Iraq providing clean water to our troops. Very dangerous job. Her husband had also served in Iraq, and her stepson. They all came back a little messed up from the war. And in 2012, we lost my niece. She committed suicide. So the Iraq war for me and my family has been a very painful experience, and this piece is a little personal for me. When the roaring 90s were going on and Wall Street was at its height of arrogance, just prior to the crash that happened in the late 1990s. At that same time, the Cold War had ended. There were some on the conservative right who made this extraordinary claim that we had somehow reached a unipolar moment. American arms had triumphed in the Cold War, and this century was destined to be ours to do with as we wished. So I wanted to build a unipolar moment. It's also about the extraordinary cost that we have paid. We spent about $10 trillion on armaments. That $10 trillion we did not spend on the social infrastructure of our own country. We couldn't house the homeless. We couldn't rebuild the middle-class economy. We didn't address our ecological issues, let alone global warming. What I was trying to suggest by this twin-headed rocking horse is the polarization of our society, the way we had become so deeply divided between left and right, between rich and poor, to the extent that we no longer seem to be able to talk to each other or to solve our nation's problems. So I decided to build a horse that rocked back and forth but never went anywhere. This is a piece called Two. When I first started building this piece, I was thinking about the nuclear arms race between us and the Soviets, and the way it was like a horse race with each side racing to get ahead. And I started building this piece, and it reminded me of my twin sister, us growing up together, and I like to build pieces about twins. So I intended to include both meanings in this piece. The inscription on the back says, "Twin hearts beat together." When my sister and I were born in 1949, they didn't have ultrasound. So my mother, when she gave birth, didn't realize that she was having twins. She went into the recovery room, and all of a sudden, the other twin showed up. The doctor had told us that he didn't realize that she had twins because our heartbeats were beating together, and that was the only way they could tell, is from heartbeats, that they were twins.
I want to especially thank Don Colley. This is the second time he's got me to make a movie about one of his artist friends. And in both cases, it was a fantastic experience for me.
After all these years and all the ups and downs, Don is really more than just a friend. He's the brother I never had.